Welcome to episode number 57. Alpha Mike, your host on Raider Cop Nation. Today's show, what are we talking about? The plastic gun. That's right. The plastic gun. Back in the mid-'80s to late 80s, law enforcement was changed beyond any man's imagination. And it all stemmed from a plastic gun. That reputation never went away and affected the brand for several years after. Today, there's a whole bunch of manufacturers that want to copy the original plastic gun. We got a whole bunch of information coming your way. And of course, we will have as a special guest on episode 57, Pistol Pete, the gunsmith, which will be with us. And he's going to talk about what great updates you can do to your firearm, such as trigger, sights, some customary work here and there, and make you a better shooter. Everything is to make you a better shooter. Of course, here on Raider Cop Nation, we are Second Amendment advocates. We believe in it, and we die by it. No, we don't believe that the forefathers of this country were mad, crazy psychos when they created the Second Amendment. They knew that there is an enemy out there somewhere lurking that wants to take you and my freedom away from us, our liberties, and as a result of that, they have given us the right to bear arms and to have those arms with little to no regulation. This episode, we will also, of course, discuss some other things that are coming on Raider Cop Nation after this program. And we still have our closing segment on training in firearms, which is coming up too. Now, we've got a lot of upgrades as far as how do you get in contact with us. Let's go through the test here, make sure that all our students are up to date. If you want to get in contact with us, you simply just go to RaiderCopNation.com, RaiderCopNation.com, all one word, and we pop up. When you get to the website, you scroll down, and there's our social icons and social networking, Twitter, Facebook, and all that other good stuff, Twitter and so forth. Now, with our Twitter account, our handle has been changed to what it used to be. Today, it's real simple to remember. It's the @ right? That's our handle or call sign, Raider Cop Nation. There you go. It's that easy. It's that easy. Call sign, right, at Raider Cop Nation. And that's us on Twitter. And of course, Facebook has a similar Facebook and then / Raider Cop Nation as well. Making it easier for you to connect with us. No excuse. We're also on a bunch of outlets, as you know. We have been a part of iTunes and Stitcher, Google Play, Spotify. We're happy that we're on there as well. And we recently jumped on TuneIn. Okay? Now, with the ability to be on TuneIn, that they're are taking our podcast. If you have the Alexa apparatus, you can simply just say to your Alexa to play Raider Cop Nation, and it should pop up. So again, we're an Overcast, Podbeam, you name it, and we're moving along. Something also that I'm very interested in. This is just an experimental run that we're doing here for the next 90 days exactly. We have a new segment, a new podcast, and that is called Test Everything. which is the motto of Radar Cop Nation. Test everything. And it's just 5 minutes long. And it's the power of the word of the Lord, straight from the scriptures. I myself carry you through an uplifting journey that every Christian or every potential believer needs in their life. 5 minutes, we will be playing those little 5-minute podcasts. That's it, just 5 minutes. Monday, Wednesday, and Fridays for the next 90 days. Then that pilot program will terminate. We'll assess it at that time with some analytics and determine if that will be a permanent thing. And if it is going to be a permanent thing, the 5 minutes will probably be increased in time period to maybe 15. Why are we separating what we had on this podcast in the conversation to those 5-minute segments? Well, it's simple. We want you to get the most information you can here. We've never had the intention of keeping certain segments that are on Radar Cop Nation. We have always played them to see if they play well with the audience. I believe that the conversation is something that is very important, and I frankly will do under any circumstance. I believe that you can train up all you want in firearms and tactical training and be law enforcement up to date and have the latest information when it comes to law enforcement. But if you're not spiritually set up for that, you're set up for failure. And that's why Test Everything is those 5-minute segments Monday, Wednesday, and Friday that will get your blood moving and keep you on the straight and narrow. That's the purpose of them. So if you go to our website, Radar Cop Nation, there you will see a new section of the page that is titled Test Everything. Go ahead and click on Test Everything. It will bring you to the page, which is just basically our overview and what we're trying to accomplish. And then you can click on the Test Everything Buzzsprout tab that's there, and it'll take you to the current episodes. They're only 5 minutes long. It is on iTunes as well, and I believe some other carriers like Spotify. Not sure what that list looks like right now. But again, this is in the obedience of the Great Commission that was declared by Jesus Christ for us as believers to go out and preach the Word of God. So catch that if you have some time. It's only 5 minutes. Test Everything, Monday, Wednesdays, and Fridays. We are moving forward, as you know, on guns. We are very pro-Second Amendment, and we will always be. We believe that Americans have a right to bear arms, but we also have a responsibility to bear arms. And that responsibility is great. The first part of that responsibility comes in the form of knowledge, because knowledge will set you free. Now, in my intro, I discussed with you the issue of the plastic gun. And during the mid-'80s to late 80s, Glock was introduced to the law enforcement community in America. And it was a certain material called Polymer, but we will get with that in a few. let's talk about the beginning of Glock, Glock Nation, as it's called today. But it wasn't Glock Nation when it was first introduced in the 1980s. It was the laughing stock of law enforcement. People would basically say, "You're not going to buy that plastic gun, are you?" And there was just horrendous the amount of rhetoric that was out there about what was being called the plastic gun. But Glock isn't the first to introduce the plastic gun or polymer. It was actually Remington, 1959. They came out with a neon 66 rifle, and the part of the lower half, the lower extremity of the rifle, was polymer. And it was to take weight off the rifle and so forth. It was introduced to the gun world, and it really didn't do too well. There's some of them are still out there, by the way. And then in 12 years before Glock, Heckler and Koch, or H&K, came out with a model called the VP. It was one of the first handguns to have polymer, and on the lower extremity of the semi-automatic, and it made the weapon a lot lighter. Again, still, it did not take the gun industry by storm, by no means of the imagination. And then 1979 to 1982, there was different models of the Glock 17, which was designed by Gaston Glock. He introduced it to the world. Now, the actual weapon of the first Glock, the Glock 17, was introduced to the Austrian, or created for the Austrian Army. And there was a lot of modifications to the weapon that were of military design. So when the weapon came to the U.S., it didn't really have a personality. First, it was a polymer gun or plastic gun. It was strange looking. It was made for the Austrian Army, but really had no need for our army to have it. And of course, law enforcement just laughed. At the time, law enforcement's primary firearm that was being used was the good old revolver, and specifically the Smith & Wesson revolver. Some had Colt, but most of them were the Smith & Wesson revolvers. And we were transitioning to the semi-automatic. Administrators were very cautious on how they proceeded towards the semi-automatic realm. Now, polymer is the plastic, and it's kind of synthetic and natural in nature, creating polymerization. And we're not going to get into the scientific aspect, and we're going to sit here and bore you with that. But the reputation that Glock earned in those early years really crushed the brand for many, many years. It was looked upon as a plastic gun, a toy. It wasn't in the league with the big boys and so forth. Now, we know that semi-automatic early on in this country were framed on the 1911, which is an outstanding pistol. But of course, for law enforcement use, it would not be very prudent because most of 1911s had to be holstered and the trigger pulled back or in the cock position. So that would have been a catastrophe for law enforcement. But with the introduction of Glock and their bad start, I mean, it was just, they fell on a broken leg immediately instead of stepping on the right leg. And it was a reputation that took them a while to get over it. One of the things that we know today, we look at the competition. And a lot of manufacturers have raced up to get to Glock. Where Glock in the early 80s or mid 80s was the laughingstock of many. Today, they're the industry leader. And in my personal opinion, the best semi-automatic to date that has ever been made. It is the most reliable. Are there better semi-automatics out there? Of course they are. And they're a whole lot more expensive. But the Glock, for the price and the reliability, it all boils down to reliability. When that weapon comes out of that holster, it does what it was made to do. You see, if you have an $800 gun, your rounds are not going to go down range faster than my Glock's rounds. So, for the price, it was ideal for law enforcement. Now, law enforcement moved in that step very slowly. They didn't jump into it. There was no such thing as give me 10,000 Glocks by Monday. It was introduced very slowly to small specific units and specialty units in law enforcement agencies for testability and so forth. Now, of course, it was the introduction or the embracing of the Glock brand happened during the Glock second generation, actually, when it started to take off. But now we look at all these other manufacturers that are trying to catch up to Glock: Smith & Wesson, SIG, H&K, the list goes on. All of them, Beretta, they all have polymer weapons out there. And as a result, what, as I said before, was the laughingstock in the 80s of the industry is the front runner now, and everybody's trying to catch up. Recently, the military, the United States military, put out a bid for semi-automatics, and they have very specific ranges or specifications that they were looking for. And there was a stiff competition from a lot of manufacturers. I think every manufacturer was in that running. Beretta, F&N, Smith & Wesson, you name it, they were involved. And of course, SIG won the initial contract. But Glock went out and went above and beyond now, just recently, releasing the Glock 43, and the Glock 43 was specifically built for law enforcement in mind. Has a lot of the specifications of the 19X that was built for the military, so it will be a game changer now for law enforcement departments. Unfortunately, a lot of them will be very slow rolling towards buying and purchasing the Glock 45, and I believe that the same creepy, crawly type of mentality will happen again with purchasing small amounts of Glock 45s, and as they incorporate them in specialty units and start branching out, replacing the Glock 17 in the future. But Glock is traditional. It has stayed to its primary belief in the format of its weapons. They have changed very little. And when they have changed for the betterment of the brand. I believe that Glock learned a very valuable lesson in inception when they got that bad reputation as the plastic gun. Of course, today we know it as the most reliable semi-automatic in history. And Glock has modified their weapons for the betterment. Very, very little change to the original specifications. So now we have everybody running up and catching up, and we're going to look at specifically on this small little segment here on the concealed carry. In 1987, Florida, first state in the United States to pass legislation on carrying concealed weapons and how that's going to be done. As a result, the gun industry now is moving very quickly towards the carry concealment industry. Now, prior to 1987, There was no real concealed weapon. They were big, bulky, heavy, made out of steel and metal. But there was one out there that was a little lighter than the other ones. But they had that funny little trigger that might go off. So as a result, third parties started creating a whole lot of holsters and a whole lot of embracing of the Glock brand. They were the front runners in the concealed weapons format. And that format came up to a lot of challenges. Recently, we can talk about one with Sig Sauer and their creation of the P365. Now, this was a weapon that was created, in my personal opinion, way too fast and in a hurry. Why? It had all kinds of issues. Now, in today's society and social networking, it did not exist in 1987. We were still using encyclopedias back then. Young millennials can go ahead and Google what an encyclopedia is. But in today's society, there are YouTubers, and there's a whole bunch of them that we love on Raider Cop Nation that do gun segments. And as a result, we've always posted them on our show notes. And they were really, sounding the alarm to SIG, and they were saying, hey, there's a problem here with your P365 and the striker, and the way it was striking or indicating on the primer, and it fell on deaf ears. SIG was, I believe they might have known it. I'm not sure. That's my personal opinion. But the brand went out come hell or high water because the competition, my friends, is fierce out there. And SIG wanted to waste no time. SIG targets Glock specifically in their competition, and they specifically look at the Glock 43. Remember, each model of the Glock is a patent that Glock has gotten. And so, therefore, that is the 43. Very small in structure and weight. It's the perfect and ideal weapon to carry for concealed weapon. The Glock 43 holds 6 in the magazine, 1 in the chamber, giving me a total of 7, while the P365 from SIG is giving me 10 in the magazine, 1 in the chamber, for a total of 11. Now, SIG, obviously, in that one scenario I just gave you, they're winning the competition. But reliability, my friends, is everything. And SIG started coming up with some serious issues on reliability on this first-gen P365. Let me just go through a list of things that they had to upgrade because customers were up in arms. They were sending SIGs back to the manufacturer faster than they were coming off the shelf. Some of the things that they had to upgrade are the following. They had to upgrade the trigger spring. They had a lot of issues with that. And people were saying during disassembly, you had to press the trigger. You didn't have to press the trigger. There was other issues with the trigger. So, excuse me, Sig Sauer comes up with a quick fix on that one. So far, so good. The firing pin, a bunch of issues with the firing pin. And some of these YouTubers were posting 300, 600, 900 rounds downrange issues with the firing pin and rendering the weapon useless at one point. And this was carrying on like wildfire. There's some people even posted a SIG through P365 that dropped and automatically went off. People were jumping on the bandwagon, kicking Sig Sauer in the shins, just like Glock was kicked in the shins in the mid-'80s. So they had to fix the firing pin. They had to fix the striker spring and enlarge that. There was issues with that. They had to fix the striker frame. And they had it like on the original Gen 1, we'll call it P365, on the striker frame, and the new second edition, they had a little cutout that they placed in there. And of course, they also did some treatment of the polymer weapon for heat, because there was reported that a lot of P365s were heating up. And did they rush to get the product out? Well, I'm sure SIG says no, but I beg to differ. Why? Look at all the freaking issues that we have to deal with. You know, Glock didn't only have the reputation it was a plastic gun. I think the hardest part of Glock's initial introduction to the world was that the magazine, because the Austrian Army requested, you had a yank or pull out of the magazine well. That's how they wanted it, instead of hitting the little magazine release button that you do today. So that was the big scandal in the mid-'80s. But today, look at SIG. They just have a whole line. It's a good weapon, the P365. A lot of people and these gun YouTubers are coming up with pretty good results on what we're calling the second gen now, the P365, and the upgrades that SIG had to make to this brand. If you really want to attack a specific segment of the brand, in this case we're talking about concealed carry, you've got to be up on your P's and Q's. And manufacturing a gun, you got to really know. I'm sure that in SIG, there were engineers and gunsmiths within the company that were screaming to the top of their lungs, "We're not ready." But the suits on the top, will just say, basically had a deadline and some stock margins they had to reach, so that weapon went out. Glock, the plastic gun, is the leader today in law enforcement. Glock now has capitalized with the Glock 45, specifically branded and modeled for law enforcement consideration. Of course, civilians can pick that up as well. As we look at the small concealed weapons permit segment that's out there, we are going to see a whole bunch of manufacturers bringing out polymer small little guns for concealment. All I can tell you in my suggestion to you as the listener is, if you're going to pick a gun because it looks pretty or it looks the part, man, this weapon looks badass, you're in the wrong business. Reliability, my friends, reliability. When you hear these individuals taking a brand new weapon off the shelf and shooting 300, 600, 900 rounds down range, and we've got issues, is that really what you want to carry? Now, I'm not kicking any other brand in the shins. I think they rushed, and they did correct what almost killed their brand, just to catch up to Glock. Now, I'm all excited because we're going to have Mike Sierra come on to the show. And then we got, of course, Pistol Pete, the gunsmith, the brand that we always support on Rated Cop Nation. The number one gunsmith in the nation, Pistol Pete, will be with us shortly. But now, the co-host of the Rated Cop Nation and the host of Leatherneck 7. And he's back, folks. Mike Sierra.
What's up? What's up? It's good to be back.
The topic of conversation on episode 57 is the plastic gun. We have brought our audience up to speed about the history of Glock and the polymer frames and so forth. And I spoke a little bit about the Glock 45, which is the new boy in town. I believe it just came out in late September. And the Glock is holding on to that law enforcement community. They don't want to let that go. So we spoke a little bit about that as well. And we're looking forward to Pistol Pete. Now,
Yeah, it's always a pleasure to hear all the Mr. Pistol Pete drop his knowledge, especially on the master of the craft that he is with any weapon system. And going back to what you said about the plastic guns, they're also calling it the ghost gun, right?
well, you know,
Ghost guns.
that's a line in one of those movies. I forgot which one it was. Many years ago, back in the late '80s, it's a ghost gun. I'll go through any X-ray and all that. But no, of course, Glock has metal components. You know, the slide's metal, steel, all that. So that's not real. It's more of a myth than anything else. But the
That's all
Glock,
BS.
the Glock has not changed their models. Very, very little have they changed. And any modifications they've done with a specific project in mind, like when they did the 19X for the military. And there was military specs that I believe that the Marine Corps is using the 19X, the Glock 19X. And there was issues with they wanted a hole by the well of the magazine so they can yank out the magazine if they had to and so forth. So Glock did those modifications for them. So they don't fool around with their guns very much. But they have one thing that the other manufacturers really don't have: reliability.
Exactly.
They've been around for over 30 years in law enforcement, and it's very rare you hear that there's a problem.
No, and that's why all the CSOs in MARSOC, all the critical skill operators, they give these warriors the option, and they all stick with Glock no matter what. Even with the big contract that the Army got with SIG and then the Marine Corps, obviously we're going to get all the Army's leftovers, so they're going to get the SIGs pretty soon. Even with that new firearm, because I shot the Beretta when I was in active duty, and it was garbage, but it got the job done. I guess you can say it. But if you ask any jarhead, they stick with the Glock no matter what.
Yeah, from the implementation of the Beretta to today's polymer frames, it's a whole different world out there. Now, is there better guns than Glock? Maybe. They most probably are, but you're going to have to spend. And really, if the primary reason that you have a weapon is for your personal defense, I said early in the intro, if I have a Glock and you've got manufacturer ABC, whatever it is, I don't want to offend anybody to start giving me hate mail, and your gun costs $900 and mine costs $399, I'm a Glock guy, does your bullet actually hit the target before mine? No, they both get down there at the same time. So it's about the reliability, that when I pull out my weapon out of the holster for it to do what it's supposed to do, it's going to do it. And you look at SIG, we spoke about that in introduction too, the P365 that has issues, had issues with the striking pin, the firing pin. They since have corrected it. Time will tell us. But they started off on the wrong foot. They had several modifications in SIG. So you're spending a lot of money, but, are there better weapons out there than Glock? And the answer is yes. But that all depends why you want the weapon. Are you a competition shooter? Do you shoot for sport? Or do you have it because you're going to defend your life or the life of your loved ones? Those are all three different categories.
Yeah, nowadays everybody just brand name. And whenever I have somebody ask me like, hey, what do you recommend? I tell them, hey, man, this is my top three right here. Glock, Smith & Wesson, and the Ruger's not too bad, but that's at the bottom of the list because it's just too pricey. And I just tell these guys, I said, go to the range, rent these guns, do whatever you got to do, but whatever works for you, because everybody's different. Everybody's built different. So whatever works for you, stick with that.
Now, I do want to say Smith & Wesson has really upped their game with the M&P. Proud owner of the M&P. I love it.
Same here. That shield is an amazing weapon. Let me tell you, I barely feel it.
I love what they're doing with that. Smith & Wesson has really listened to their customers. And so they're a little bit of a competition. There's a lot to go, a lot to get to reach the Glock level. In other words, what I mean by that, for every police officer to have an M&P in their holster. I don't think we're there yet, but I do believe that Smith & Wesson is taking a bite out of that competition from Glock. So it's going to hurt.
And let me tell you we're not. And let me tell you we're not. I know I was there when you purchased yours, and you were there when I purchased mine. And let me tell you, these Smith & Wessons, they're with their prices, they're very reasonable.
Yes. And that was the big sell of the Glock. The Glock was always very reasonable priced. And
yeah, when they first came out, everybody was buying because it's a cheap gun. And like, oh, it's a cheap gun. Let me try it out. And then like, holy, it's actually a damn good freaking handgun.
Yeah, the same sellout that was telling you a week earlier that it was a plastic gun is now secretly with sunglasses and a hat, tippy-toeing in the gun store buying a Glock.
Yeah, everybody's Team Glock now.
And everybody now at Glock Nation. but a lot of them are converts because they were sellouts when the product first came out. So Pete's going to take us through the modification process, triggers, sights, a little bit about everything that you can do and modify. Talking to Pete off the recorder, off the mic a little while ago, he was telling me how people, do modifications of the trigger guard. And specifically those modifications to the trigger guard, the objective is to get your hand or your wrist up as far up the frame by the tang as possible so you have a better grip. And Glock, their trigger guard system is very low, so a lot of people want to modify that. But the unfortunate part, as Pete was telling me off the mic, which was that people were doing it themselves. And, you take a little bit too off the top, next thing you know, there's no more trigger guard, there's just a trigger. So you got to go to a reputable guy, somebody that knows what they're doing.
Yeah, because you got people that are, now you can get everything on YouTube, but I highly, I'm against that. Take it to the professionals because you don't want to mess up your weapon. This is your defense weapon for you, your family. So if you're looking out there to do your upgrades, and some of you are capable of doing it, but like, me and Al said, stick to the professionals, guys, and it's going to be that much worth it because you're going to get back your handgun and it's going to be in better condition. It's exactly what you want instead of you trying to figure it out on yourself and then you're messing up your gun.
Yeah, and we're going to be posting on our show notes only the reputable YouTubers that are gun aficionados that we recommend. There are 1,000,000 to 1 people out there that will show you a gun, but they have absolutely no idea what they're doing. But we have a small little list of those that we can point to and say whatever they say is golden. So we'll link them to our show notes whenever we're talking or we want to give a pictorial of what we're saying. Until we get, of course, our camera set up and we can do it ourselves. Not there just yet, but we're getting there.
Yeah, I'm excited to hear Pete, being a fellow jarhead, got the Marine Corps birthday coming up. And the big rise that I'm noticing with veterans, especially with the Marine Corps, because we're all gun nuts. A lot of Marine Corps veterans are getting out, after their respective terms, and they're all getting into, running their own armories. And I look at all these guys and I talk to them on a daily basis. And just like with Pete, Pete's an older generation jarhead. But the fact is that, they might not realize it, but that's therapy right there, man. Like I see that, and that's keeping these warriors in the fight, out of trouble, out of letting these demons take over their mind and their thoughts and get depressed. Because when you're constantly engaged, you don't have time for these demons to take over. So these guys are fighting the good fight, and it's amazing to see their work.
Yeah, and when you are part of those communities, they're very important too. Like Glock or Smith & Wesson. They've all got chat groups and stuff, maybe on Facebook. And why is it's important? Because you learn. People are enthusiastic about their weapon, their brand, and you might be new to the brand and you might have questions, and they're going to basically answer it with no problem at all, free of charge, because they're really into their brand. So it's always good to be part of that community.
But I want to also throw in there, Al, how important it is for everybody to go out and vote. This elections, because you got these candidates, whatever you want to call them, that want to take away our gun rights, which is it's in the Constitution. They can try as many times as they want, but these are scary times to be an American, especially a Second Amendment American.
Yeah.
And just go out there, guys, vote, because this is our future. And if you don't see it now, by the time you do, it's going to be too late. So go out there and vote.
I was speaking to my very close friend of mine that I respect a lot, and we were actually texting back and forth, and he was asking me about the elections, and I was giving him my position, and he said, "It seems like you're moving totally to the right." And I said, well, that happens by default setting with me. Anybody that comes in with socialist and communist ideology and they want to take away my gun, it's off the table. I've got no rap for you at all.
Yeah, because being a Cuban American, and a lot of Cuban Americans, they seen this before. It's not a surprise. So when they see this, then they wonder, oh, why are you so to the right? Like, dude, because these people actually lived through communism. They don't want to go through that crap again, especially when it's supposed to be, we're supposed to be the free world country in the whole world, the USA, but we're still dealing with third world country crap. I don't understand that.
Yeah, well, my dad tells me about the sweetnesses of socialism, how they'll say perfect things that your ear wants to hear, and before you know it, you're in the evil web, and to enforce their rule, they turn into communists. And Cuba's still going through that over 60 years later. Horrible, horrible.
Yep.
And look at poor Venezuela. That tells you everything. So
yeah, and they're still struggling. It's been months now since that whole country's been in turmoil. So my family's from Nicaragua, and they're dealing with their own. So it's
right.
It's definitely a movement that's getting across the world, and it's very scary.
Well, yeah, it's worldwide. It is kind of locked into this globalism too. So there's a lot of rich, powerful people that are pushing this. You say, well, why are they pushing socialism? How do they benefit? Because they're going to be on the top of the totem pole. That's why they're pushing it. So it's to subdue the little guy, but the big guy's going to probably stay big. You can look at our social media people, Facebook and Instagram and Twitter and Amazon, the whole list and array of a bunch of them, and you see how they pull left. Well, the reason they pull left is because they're in partnership with the government, so they feel, well, whatever happens, we'll be fine. Forget the little guy. It's pretty much is what it is. So enough about the politics, because that puts a gloom on any listener's ears.
Yeah, we're ready for Pistol Pete.
That's right. Before they hit the off button, because we're talking crap, we're going to bring on the one and only, the man, the maestro himself, Pistol Pete.
Let's do it.
Now, as always, here's Pistol Pete, and it's always a blessing for us to have him on Radio Cop Nation. Mr. Pistol Pete, welcome to the show.
Why, thank you, and it's a pleasure for me to be here.
It's always a pleasure of the audience. This is the final part of our 3-part series on training with weapons, and we've kind of very successfully brought the novice, just got a gun, how to shoot it, how to train upon it, how to clean it. We went through that, and we did it with semiautomatic and revolver. Then we went to a little bit more advanced, I'm shooting 300, 400, 500 rounds down range. I feel real comfortable. Have my weapon for a good 6 months or so. And we added rifle and shotgun into the cleaning as well. Now, this show is a little bit more advanced. I've got a lot more rounds down range, and I want to start to get into tactical training. But I wish that of course, my shooting or my grouping was a little bit better. So we want to concentrate with the audience on, even though that their weapon is brand new out of the box, there are certain gunsmith modifications that they can do that will make them, of course, a better shooter. The first thing I want to look at, and of course it all depends, and you're the master at this, and you'll explain it to the audience. Is there a possibility that I could change my trigger on my semi-automatic to make me a better shooter?
Absolutely. You can, depends on the firearm itself. Different firearms are made, of course, they're designed differently. So you have basically the same parts on all of them, just the way that they interact sometimes is a little different. But there's always something that can be done to improve the trigger. And a nice, smooth, crisp trigger is going to give you a lot better accuracy downrange. Some of them, for example, on a Glock, which is a very common firearm, there's not actually much that you can do to the parts themselves. You actually have to change the parts because the interaction is actually just the geometry of the parts. So it's not like you can take a part and file it down and that's going to help you in reducing your trigger weight. It's actually changing the geometry of how the parts interact, and that's done at the manufacturer's level. But yes, some of them you can grind and stone. The gunsmith can. I don't recommend this for everybody. This is rather high level. But if you have somebody that you can trust that is a good, reputable gunsmith, yes, improving your trigger is a significant improvement to your marksmanship.
And if you don't have a gunsmith that you can trust, we always recommend Pistol Pete. His information is always on our website, Pistol Pete, and you can go there and contact him, and he'll tell you how to get the weapon over to him and whatever modifications you would be interested in. Now, the trigger, it's going to make me a better shooter because of the trigger reset, which is an outstanding concept for making a better shooter. Now, I can do the same thing with my sights, correct?
Actually, that would be my first modification that I would do to a brand new firearm. Usually, factory sights are subpar, unless you already ordered the firearm with a set of great sights. Again, we'll go to the Glock, which is a very common firearm. The sights that come out of the box from Glock are adequate for very rough training, but
right.
They're not anywhere near what you can do and what you can get from aftermarket sights. You can get things like fiber optic. You can get things like night sights, which would be a tritium insert inside of the sight, which actually just glows by itself. The fact that they're steel, most of them, is just by that fact is an improvement over the actual plastic Glock sights that can tear on you. It can break. That would probably be my first option for a modification, and that's what I suggest to most people when they come to the shop. Get a good set of sights on the gun, and that's going to help you overall.
Now, based on, just to give the audience a little bit better analogy, it's like looking out a dirty window, and now you've come and you've put Windex, cleaned it up, and you can say, well, I could see a whole lot more, is basically what Pete is saying on a brand new sight. It makes that target
That's a great analogy.
It makes that target look a lot more crisp for you to attack it. And it's perfectly safe to the weapon, correct? If you go ahead and modify it and change it, no, it's not going to mess up anything on the gun.
No, it's not. That's an external modification. Most of the guns that are out there are on a dovetail, so it's a matter of they fit by pressure, and some of the sight manufacturers even include like a little sight pusher that's made out of aluminum where you won't harm the material. I don't recommend that you try to put them on with a steel punch because the actual steel on the sight is designed to be softer than the steel on the slide. That way, if anything messes up, it'll be the sight, not the slide. But with the right tools, it should not even be a mark on the gun once the gunsmith does it.
Yeah, we recommend to any of our listeners, and we're going to be posting on our show notes some YouTube videos from those YouTuber gun enthusiasts that we recommend. Not everybody on YouTube knows exactly what they're doing, but we'll put one that you can kind of understand better what Pete is talking about. Now, there's some other modifications I can do with my weapon that may be a little bit more advanced, and that are the internal components as well.
Yes, correct.
Maybe the barrel or springs and so forth.
Yes, you can get aftermarket barrels. Usually they're made a little bit to a tighter tolerance than the factory barrels, and they have a tighter chamber. But I don't recommend that as much for a defense gun. That'll be more for like a fun gun to go take to the range.
Correct.
The tighter the tolerances, the more accurate the weapon is going to become, but it's also going to have a tendency to, with chest fouling and the dirt and stuff, it can jam up on you a little bit easier. It's like like a car, okay? You have a Toyota, which is dependable. It's going to take you everywhere every day. And then you have the Ferrari, which is for the weekend, so you can go really fast.
There you go. That's a better analogy.
There's no such thing as one gun fits everything.
Right.
There's no such animal. I wish there was, but there is no such animal.
Right. And you make a great point. That there are certain things, the gun brand new out of the box works perfectly, folks. And what we're recommending is to make you a more better and accurate shooter. But that also depends what Pete is saying. What type of shooter do you want to be? Are you into competition or just a sport of it? Or is this weapon for your personal defense? So depending who you define yourself to be as a gun activist or gun person, that depends the kind of modifications you should do on the weapon.
Okay, I don't recommend that for your defense carry. That would be absolutely crazy. You want, for a defense gun, you want a nice, smooth trigger, but yet you want it to be heavy so that you know that you're pulling on it.
Yeah.
You don't want it to accidentally discharge because you're trying to jerk it out of the holster because you're in a bad situation.
Correct.
So the modifications are according to what the gun's purpose is. For example, we were discussing sights earlier. You can get the thinner the front sight post is, the more accurate you can make the adjustments on your target. But the thinner the front sight post is, the harder it is to pick up.
Right.
So for a defense gun, you want a pretty thick, very bold colored front sight so that as you're bringing it up on target, you can pick it up quickly. A very thin one is going to give you a little bit more accuracy for the shot. But, a human body is about 13 inches across. You don't need to have 1-inch groups in order to defend yourself.
Right.
But you might want 1-inch groups if you're in competition.
Correct.
But again, we go to the Ferrari analogy.
Yeah, no, and that's a perfect analogy. You're going to take that weapon out just for special occasions. And in a threat situation, the target or the actual sights are going to be bigger than life in a real situation. So,
Yes.
and they're going to be bigger than life because that your life depends on it. Now, there are some other modifications that people can do, and this is where Pistol Pete he does artwork. And I recommend everybody that's listening to go to his website and see exactly how he could take your weapon and modify it based on color or painting it or making it a certain style based on what you like. And now the weapon becomes a little bit more personal to you. That might make you a better shooter because you feel more pride in your weapon. Maybe your favorite color is blue and you want to paint it blue, or you're a female and you want to paint it pink. I saw, Pete, you have for breast cancer awareness month of October, you have a pink gun on there as you.
Yeah, I just put one out. I put a pink one out today, yesterday or the day before, and I put a picture out on Facebook of a gun that I did some stippling on. That is an excellent modification because it gives you a much more tactile grip on your firearm. It grabs you. It helps for you to hold the gun. Most guns now that we're shooting are plastic. They offer very little in a way of having a good solid grip.
Right.
If your hands are sweaty and, if you're in a bad situation, they're going to be sweaty. But if your hands are sweaty or, having that aggressive grip on there is going to help you in not letting go of the firearm. So that's another good modification to think about.
Yeah, absolutely. The grip is very important in making yourself a better shooter. And Pistol Pete has brought up an excellent point, and that is what we've been talking about all during this podcast, which is the polymer. The plasticness of that frame. Your hand is going to slip, and there's modifications that can be done to that frame as well to make that grip a little tighter.
Yes.
Now,
and it's not over complex procedure. I mean, if you feel confident and you're kind of it's something that you can do yourself.
Yeah, I mean, we always recommend a prudent gunsmith like Pistol Pete.
I agree. I'm not trying to put myself out of business, but it's something that if you're a do-it-yourselfer, it's something that can be done by yourself because it's an external modification.
Yeah, you see people out there with the tape and all that, and then several weeks later the tape is hanging on one side. But you want to go to a professional and get it done right. You don't have to worry about it. Once that weapon is done right. If you're looking for aesthetics, yes. It's your personal weapon. It's just like your car that we brought up that analogy, or your home, you want it to your liking. So you network with that gunsmith, and hopefully it's Pistol Pete, and tell him what you want. He kind of gives you a little take on what he can do with it, and you start loving your weapon. And that's when you love your weapon, you're a better shooter. There's no way around it.
Absolutely.
Well, my friend,
I had a customer.
Yeah.
One thing, I had a customer bring me in a firearm that he did, and he wanted to paint it, and he had done the stippling. This was the ugliest stippling I've ever seen, but he was proud of his stippling, and it did what it was supposed to do. It improved his actual grip. So it is what it is.
I got to ask you, did you tell him it was the ugliest stippling?
I told him, I'm frank.
No, I know you are.
I told him, this is ugly. You want me to try to fix it? He goes, no, I did it. I go, okay.
I took pride in his work, even though it was a disaster.
It was what it was, yes.
Well, again, I've seen some pretty bad jobs. I really have. And they like it. It's theirs. I don't know how they learned to do it, but they love it. Supposedly works for them.
Those are the people that had their pictures. Their mom would put their pictures up on the refrigerator. Yes.
You got to love Pistol Pete. He always keeps it real. He keeps it real. So But
it's okay to try. I don't recommend you trying any internal modifications on a firearm unless you know how the firearm works. But external ones, if you want to try it, go for it.
Yeah. I mean, kind of
enjoy your firearm. It's your toy.
Yeah, and you want to look over your manufacturer's guides to do and don'ts.
Oh yes,
before you get a little crazy, wanting to cook your gun.
And like we discussed the last time, make sure the ammo is in another room.
Yeah, far away.
Yes.
They don't mix well.
No,
They don't mix well during the recreation.
not at all.
During the recreation stage. You've
Yes, sir.
we've given our listeners a lot of knowledge as far as what they can and cannot do, and that with their weapon, which is going to help them tremendously in the overall upkeep of their personal weapon. As always, Pete, it is a pleasure to have you on Raider Cop Nation. You are a tremendous benefit and blessing to all our listeners, and we thank you for being here.
My brother, God bless you.
God bless you, brother. And just like that, Pistol Pete went back to work. We're always blessed to have him on the show. Well, that concludes episode 57, The Plastic Gun. As a reminder, 58, Human Trafficking, will be with the cop. He will talk to us about the human tragedy that human trafficking exists in today's society, modern day slavery. And then we will wrap up the month of October 31st, with gangs. And the superhero co-guest for that will be also the cop. Folks, it's been my honor, my pleasure to be your host on Raider Cop Nation. As a reminder, you can always reach out to us on RaiderCopNation.com, and we encourage you to listen to Test Everything, small little podcasts, no more than 5 minutes, that will uplift you and regenerate you spiritually as well. There, you can find that on the website as well. May the Lord bless you. May the Lord bless the agency that serves you. And may the Lord continue to bless the United States of America. Alpha Mike, signing out.
Guide her through the night with a light from above, from the mountains to the prairies, to the oceans, white with foam. God bless America, my home.
Someone alive with the heart. 4323, just 1322.